Anamchairde, tá farú na fáilte roimh go léir higan chaint seo, higan sesiún chainte seo, agus tá ma héan an seo in éanach watha, agus béimiid ag plé cursaí teangacha, agus teangachaí dúchais. This is all part of Seachtain na Gaeilge le energy, and we're in for an interesting exchange. We have a lot to learn from each other to help contextualize our discussion. I want to tell you of one aspect of our shared history and a special affinity that the people of Ireland have for over 170 years with Native Americans. So in 1847, when the Great Hunger on Gortamore was at its height, the people of the Choctaw Nation, some of them at least, gathered together and decided to make a contribution to help the people with their unbearable plight across the Atlantic in a small island that they probably knew little about, Ireland. And what is most significant about that act of humanity is that the Choctaw Nation themselves had been swept off their own native land to the then whereabouts of Oklahoma. And that had just happened 16 years before they made this very generous donation. That would be about $5,000 in today's money. But the people of Ireland have never forgotten that huge gesture at our greatest time of need. And we have many, many similarities in terms of land, in terms of colonization, dispossession, linguistically. And I suppose the reason why we're gathered here is that we have those similarities. And we have differences, but we have similarities with many of the native peoples of America and Canada. This is going to be a co-production with our sister centre in St. Paul, Minnesota. And with that, I'm going to hand over to the very capable Lily O'Donnell, who's in Winnipeg, who's going to be our moderator for this discussion. Lily.
So my name's Lily O'Donnell. I'm an Irish-American person living in Winnipeg, Manitoba right now. I grew up in between St. Paul, Minnesota and Dublin, Ireland. So I grew up kind of trying to stumble my way through Gaelic classes in school, really dreading it, to be quite blunt. And then so I didn't pick up that much. All I really know is how to say, can I go to the bathroom? Because you had to know that to go to the bathroom. So Cadagum, Gulti, and Letras. That's my Gaelic really for you. Yeah, so somehow by some weird luck of chance, I ended up going to the University of Winnipeg from St. Paul. When I got to the University of Winnipeg, I started taking all these really amazing Indigenous studies courses and really having so much of my life feel expanded and so much of my understanding of who I am and who my ancestral connections are be so enriched and deepened by learning about how my professors and my students looked at their connection to their ancestors. And I felt like I was really growing, and that connection between the spiritual and the political was finally coming together within myself. And I guess like through my own expansion, this conversation was even able to happen through me learning about Ojibwe history, Anishinaabe history, Canadian history. I would always kind of say my 2 cents about what I knew about my Irish culture and my Irish background. And I'm feeling very happy. And I think that a sign of a good life is the people you have in it. And I think I'm living a very, very good life, that I have connections to such intelligent, passionate folks. So thank you for letting me be part of this discussion. And I'm kind of just going to go into a circle of what I see. And please explain who you are, where you come from, and where you live. So Jerry, I'm going to start with you.
My name, bonjour. Makwa Guma, the Goni, Makwana Tute, Ojibwe, Nishnave, now. Sakatong Donji, Chicken, Ma Bejan, Nongo, Chicago, Anishna, Ojibwe Win, Irish Moon, Egan the Chicken, Megwich the now, Patrick O'Donnell, she go dancing Lily, she go Mewe Tichwasa Gum King, Raymond. I introduced myself. My Ojibwe name is Bear Chief. I'm Bear Clan. I'm an Ojibwe speaking human being, and I'm from where the river widens. And I said Miigwech for Patrick and his daughter Lily for actually making this possible for the invitation. And to Raymond, Agum King, all the ways across the big water. So it's. I think it's a special time. We're talking about. We're going to be talking about language revitalization, language survival. So I'm happy to be here because I think it's quite important.
Patrick, do you want to go next?
It's Misha Padraig O'Donnell. It's Misha Stiora Hor Idakis. Don Onid Cultural in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hello, everybody. I am Patrick O'Donnell. I'm a Director of Education with the Celtic Junction Arts Centre. We are delighted always to be the sister centre with Éineach Bhacta in Armagh. I'm delighted to be part of this panel. I grew up in Dublin, so the Irish word Dublin, the place name, translates from the Irish Dublin, meaning black pool. And I live now in Minnesota, which is a Dakota Sioux name meaning cloudy water. So I moved from the black pool, Dublin, to the land of the cloudy water in Minnesota. And in that same sense of the memory of the spiritual and political being held in the landscape and in the place names, I welcome you to today's panel. Moderated by my daughter, Lily.
Thanks. Megan, do you want to go next?
Buju, Migaze, Tibike, Gizizikwe, and Dishnakas, Mikanak, Indodem, Erikstell, and Duji. My name is the Eagle Moon Woman, and I'm from Turtle Clan. I grew up in Erikstell. Today I'm in Winnipeg. I'm Métis Anishinaabe, as well as Swedish and Scottish on my dad's side and Polish on my mom's side. I really appreciate being here.
Thank you, Megan. Darren, you want to go next?
Sure. Bonjour, ni doe magni dok. Songi gaboe makwan ndebo. Megazine do them say again tunji makwana kwimene shnabe Ojibwe ndao. Ni mama onji wete say again Beverly Christianish nakazo. Ni mama onigi guk onji wak say again Viola Shago George Christianish nakazo wat. Inawa and Baba Ban onji wete kish winning Reginald Blackbird kish nakazo. Nababa Omamayan, Onji Titipi ni Zibing, Shugo Nababa Obabayan, Onji Kishikuining, Harry Shugo Albert Blackbird is Nakazawat, Gichi Minwe and Damo Oma Ayayan Nongum. So I just to translate a little bit of that long introduction that I just gave of myself. I am known as the bear that stands strong, and I'm from the Eagle Clan, and I'm originally from Saging. I also said who my parents are. Traditionally, we're supposed to give that little gift of a little bit of genealogy so that you know who my people are. I'm from Saging, so was her parents, Viola and George, and I also talked about my deceased dad, who was from Isikuning. And his parents, his mom is from Rolling River, and his dad is from the same community as him. And it's kind of like a little bit of a protocol that we do and sort of ground and position ourselves. And so I also said that I'm very happy to be here today because of the topic that we're going to be discussing, language revitalization. So I want to say congrats to all of you for inviting me to speak today.
Next we'll go to you, Raymond.
Gurakiad Maigat, Lily, Tamahian and Sonagajo of a Kainch live on Shaw and you, O Ardwaha, Togu a Grishvik Linen me in Ardwaha Has. I learned the Irish language as a second language And I spend a lot of time in the Gaeltacht, where the Irish language is the home language. That's what we call Tuber na Gaeilge, the well of pure Irish. And it's great to be on a panel and to have the native tongues of our various lands being placed center stage, even though we're also going to use English as well. So, Gurachéad Maigah.
Now, will we go around and just say quickly, what does language revitalization mean to you? We'll just go around again. So, Jerry, we'll start with you.
I think language revitalization for me is about life itself. I think for a lot of our people, we have that, there's a cultural disconnection, there's a spiritual disconnection, and I see language and land as being part and parcel of the same thing. So when we talk about language revitalization, that tells me that there's a spiritual, a land disconnect with the land. The Kiminam, we're not communicating with the land, who holds all this knowing and the memories of our families and our people. So I think that spatial exile creates these problems for me. Looking at it from a spiritual or the spatial exile rather, and the social problems that it created will be mitigated by knowing the language of the land. That's what language revitalization means to me. Miigwech.
Thanks for that. Thank you. Next, we'll go to you, Patrick.
Tirgan Changa, Tirgan Anam, the country without its tongue or its language is without its soul. So that would overlap with what Jerry is saying, that language is part of a kind of a spiritual connection to the land and to life itself. And I think the theme that Lily announced, that there's a spiritual depth inside the politics of language revitalization, is one of the real benefits of listening to the language spoken by Irish speakers and Ojibwe speakers today, to see the depth of the soul that is still carried by the language. The creator, in whatever name the creator is given, the creator has given us language to be unique and to speak our words with respect for the earth. And so the consequence of language revitalization was all the way to the attempt to preserve the earth and preserve the memory of the earth. So again, the naming of the landscape, when you don't know the names, shows an amnesia, which leads to a kind of a sickness in any culture. And so I think the question of language revitalization, as Jerry mentioned and Lily mentioned, is as deep a question as we can ask as human beings with a spiritual consciousness.
Thank you. Now we'll go to Megan.
Thank you. So for me, when I think of language revitalization, the big thing that comes up is emotions. And how it feels to speak the language, to know the language, but especially how the relationships feel around us and the relationship with ourselves. And so where that goes to for me is teachings that have been shared with me about identity for Anishinaabe ways of knowing. And so what I know is that there's 4 main pieces. One of them being language and how we speak it. And, it also includes our clan, our name, and our purpose, which always relates to how we help people. If we're speaking a language that doesn't value all relationships and all life around us, it really changes our worldview, and it changes the way that we interact, not only viewing others, but ourselves. And so also with that identity, a really, really big thing is our strengths and weaknesses, and just knowing who we are and how to go around in life and what resonates with us as individuals and as groups, and especially remembering that others' strengths aren't our weaknesses. And that creates that kindness, or it allows that kindness to live, right? That kindness is there. It's just if we decide to use it or not. And so that's what I think of. And then it stems into so many things and so many beautiful things. So I've just started learning the language regularly, like I go to a class, and I'm very thankful for it. And, you know, the feelings that come with it, there's no way to explain it. So I'm very thankful that I'm walking the road that I am and that I get to learn. So miigwech.
Thank you. We'll go to Darren next.
Thank you. So, what language revitalization to me, what it sparks is an understanding of who I am, and a way Patrick sort of touched on it earlier is that there's an Ojibwe phrase that we use and that I was taught by many language speakers is Manitu Kiminiku Yang Anishinaabe Moen. That the Creator gave us this gift, and for us as Anishinaabe, we understand that language is just one of many gifts that the Creator gave us to use. And if we don't use those gifts that are given to us, we become unfocused, unbalanced, and that tends to be the root of what Akwese sickness is. And so for us, or for me, using Anishinaabe Moen helps heal me and helps heal my community. It's language revitalization is all about healing. It's about moving forward past all this historic trauma that we've gone through, the attacks on our language, and by just physically speaking, like where we're remembering something. It's another imperative is like don't forget where you come from. So language revitalization is embodied in those two Anishinaabe phrases, and not forgetting who we are. Like my intro that I gave, part of it is Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, and Dao, that tells you that I'm from the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe nation. For us, we have to remember that language is essential to nationhood. It's one of 7 principles that the Anishinaabe understand that express nationhood. So there's the belief in Manitou, so belief in God, Creator, whatever you want to call him or her. Our relationship to Aki, so our relationship to land. The people that we have, the Anishinaabe Ojibwe, Anishinaabe Moen, of course, our language, the teachings that we've been given on how to live, Gagibi Ijese Maguin, our history from the Big Bang to now, and Ishkewanan, our ways of doing. When we talk about language revitalization, it's healing that understanding and then coming to this place where we remember that we are nations too, and that we have a special gift to use. And I always remember that the elders that I from my home community, Mark Thompson is one. He's passed on, and he would always speak to me and say, "Abachuyan, get in the way." Always use the language he would tell me, and that's the only way we're going to move forward. So revitalize. That's what revitalization is. It's a process of moving forward. It's a process of healing. It's a process of remembering who we are and our place in the world, in the universe.
Raymond, you want to finish us off?
For me, in the Irish context, language revitalization is not a lifestyle choice. It's something that I have to do and I want to do. And thankfully, I also work in a job that allows me to be centrally involved in the revitalization of my native language. And I loved what Jerry said, and Darren also mentioned it. And indeed, Patrick mentioned it too, this connection to the land. It's almost as though that unlike other aspects of nature, we're hovering across the land, and if we have anything that actually represents roots into the land, it would be our language, which connects us to the land and connects us to our ancestors who are in the land, even though their spirits are with us. But it also allows, it's almost like a compass for the future. And language revitalisation is working in Ireland. We want more, we want better results, and there's far, far more Irish medium education than when I started school. I couldn't have gone to an Irish medium primary school, for example, but my daughter went to one, and there are now 40 Irish medium schools in the small corner of Ireland, what we call the north of Ireland here, the Republic of Ireland, where the Irish language is the first language and enjoys full support of the state. In the north here, the Irish language does not have an official status, but broadly speaking, the headlines would indicate that there is definitely more Irish language activity, more Irish language being spoken, more support for the Irish language. In fact, the Irish language is often seen as a chic aspect of our culture, and it is drawing more and more people of varying ages into its orbit. But we want more, and we want greater protection for the Irish language, and we want the Irish language to be available and open to all, which it is, not only on the island of Ireland, but throughout the world. So that's what the Irish language revitalisation means to me.
Thank you for that. Thank you. So we're gonna move into some heavier questions here. So first, I'm gonna ask a question kind of relating to language and political power. So this is a quote from one of my classmates in one of my classes this semester. She said, "When you give Indigenous people power, you take power away from the Canadian state." That's a quote from Marcia. So through language revitalization, power is taken from the oppressor and given back to the historically oppressed. How can language be seen within your community or within your experience as a political act of resistance? So we're going to start with Jerry.
Boy, that's a big question. Shkeni, mizeri sanagan, unishna bek munje ama, manetu okay. Anish, Penegu tapanane we de gouje bimadsen kindasen ijichigewe mijigo nishnarekto me way political action for me it's let me I grew up in a very political family, and in the family, we talked. I heard about resistance almost, all the time. Whether it was about residential school, whether it was about challenging the Catholicism and the Catholic Church, its control over education here in Saguin, whether it was about challenging the Canadian government in terms of, the control that it had over our people. And there's, Darren and I are from the same community. We had a residential school situated right in the middle of the community. But Saguin, ironically enough, is one community that has a lot of Ojibwe speakers, Ojibwe speakers. And when you ask people, the generation before us, how were you able to maintain the language? And a lot of them will tell you that the nuns and the priests went with us all the time when we were playing. We'd speak Ojibwe, and the freedom from the clergy and so on, I think was reflected in their ability to maintain and to communicate and to Ojibwe. So speaking Ojibwe, maintaining the ability to speak Ojibwe, and having the ability to dream, Ojibwe was really an act of resistance. It was a political act of resistance. And like I said, I grew up in this political family, and for me, it's important to always share this. It's my mom I hear. When I speak in Ojibwe with her, resistance. For her, resistance was about kindness. They're kind of a polar opposites. But in terms of political oppression, in terms of repression, in terms of meanness, in terms of viciousness, Joe said, you respond to that by being kind. And I'm all over the map with my answer. Political resistance, I think, is important to language revitalization. And Darren and Raymond and Patrick as well talked about identity. It's this identity is what our identity is what is going to feel our way of being and our life. I don't know if that makes any sense. The map with my answer. It's come back maybe in the next one. Maybe add something further. Miigwech.
Thank you, Jerry. Your answer does make sense. Just a quick response to your question. I think kindness is one of the strongest acts of resistance you can have in this world. So I think that's really beautiful. Your mom said that, but your mom taught you that. But so Patrick, you're next. You know the question.
Hey, thank you, Lily. I'll just speak briefly. So there was an 18th century Irish piper who described his action as follows in the Irish language. Bekanishme is makul or vala. Ikshanam kyol the folky followed. Look at me now with my back to the wall, playing music to empty pockets. And I think that's beneath all of the institutions. In Ireland, I think we suffer from too many institutions and organizations. But the idea that the spirit of somebody with no money would play his music to empty pockets is better. It's better to have the empty pockets and your soul is in an alliance with the language rather than constantly institutionalizing and creating bureaucracies. Let it bubble up from the soul of the people. And so that's my attitude is, as long as my pockets are empty, hopefully my mind will be full of something.
Thank you. Thanks. Megan?
So for me, what I think of is how it takes away that need for sameness, which is something that has been imposed on any colonized group of people for a very long time. And even Europeans who came here, that need for sameness is imposed constantly, and it removes almost like an awareness of how to take care of ourselves and how to live not only individually, but in our larger community and group settings. So as long as we are able to take what we can and do it in the ways that we can, because we are all different. The steps that I would take would be different than the steps that anybody else would take because we're different individuals and they would just make sense in different ways. It allows that room for it, but it also allows us to say to governing parties, like, that's not enough. This isn't acceptable, or this isn't a one size fits all. I'm different from this person, and it's more than the regular politics you would think of. It's even with medicines and how everyone has a different relationship, and it can be on either side of the spectrum or right in the middle, but it can still be different for people. And that's one of the biggest problems that we see today is that need for sameness, because it takes away that identity and that allowance of living your purpose and how you're helping others, also how you're helping yourself and your whole lineage and all that life around you. So it's, for some people, I know they say if I'm saying miigwech at the end of an email that I'm imposing my language upon them. And well, it's ridiculous, really. Like there's nothing really to say other than roll my eyes and hope that they learn a different way. But I'm okay not being the same as everyone else, and it took me a long time to be okay with that. And I hope everyone else gets there as well. Miigwech.
Thank you. Thanks, Darren.
For me, when we talk about resistance and taking power away from the colonial authority, I have to go back to what my great-grandparents taught my grandparents and my parents. In my home community of Saging, we had, the church had a lot of power. And no offense to the church, like I was raised Roman Catholic. We went to church. I was altar boy, did all that stuff, and confirmed and everything. But for us back home, what my great grandparents taught my grandparents and my parents is Tunga, how do you say that again? Tungashkige, to stand against the taking away of our language. They resisted in a way that was unique to their circumstance. How I remember my mom telling a story that when her grandparents were raising her, they would pray at night, and they would pray not in English. They would pray in Ojibwe. They would lock the door because they didn't want like some random person walking in and seeing them speak the language. And so they resisted in that way, and they were able to maintain that connection to the language, and it allowed me to grow up hearing it all the time. And like what Megan talked about, they were resisting Beijiko Nendamowin or hegemony, if you want to call it that, this singular way of thinking. And they helped, by them doing that, it allowed me to maintain a different way of thinking. And that's what Anishinaabemowin gives me, is a different way of thinking than the Munyashuk or Mitugawishuk, like the English, the French, everyone else. I think differently because I have Anishinaabemowin. That's the imperative my great-grandparents, my grandparents, and even my parents give me, is if we don't use the language, we're going to stop thinking as Anishinaabe. So it's a resistance to the process of Gwekwentamowin, the process of changing one's mind, and in essence, it's a resistance to colonialism at its root. I love to hear these stories about how our people always talked, even when there was so much oppression. And Jerry touched on that. Even though we had a residential school, we spoke in there. And my great grandmother talked about that too. My great grandmother Christina, she talked about how when there was no priests or nuns around, and at night when they were in the residential school, they spoke in the language to comfort each other. And that's a story that I call Bizanagobe Maji Owen survivance. Those are survivance stories, and we need to hear more of these. And it tells us that we weren't always victims that we resisted, and we fought back in subtle ways to undermine that colonial authority, that colonial logic, that that absurd thinking that made them think that they were right. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little too political. I apologize. I'll stop.
That was a really, really beautiful story. Oh my goodness. Ooh, thank you so much for that, Darren. And I like the political. I think it's a good thing. Okay, Raymond.
Gurmaigat, Lily. So with regard to an act of political resistance, it's a good, easy question in my own context. So the colonialism is never a good idea. I am not aware of, I am actually aware of some people talking about the benefits that have accrued from colonialism, but really and truly, colonialism is not a good idea. Native people should be left to their own devices. And another thing is that the history of the people of Ireland and the linguistic history of the people of Ireland is beleaguered, and it's caused largely by colonialism. And now in the Republic of Ireland, the Irish language on paper is the first language, so it should be an act of nationalism and to use the Irish language. But sometimes I get the feeling that it seems like an act of resistance, even in the Republic of Ireland, where the language is the first language, to demand to do your business with the state through that language, the first language. So in the north here, politics probably is not the best way to develop your linguistic diversity and to see the native language. Probably because since the foundation of the state only 100 years ago, one section of the community did not really want anything to do with the Irish language, and the other part of the community, a small, a very narrow minority, did want to associate with the Republic of Ireland. We tend to use the Irish language to assert our unique ancestry, our unique inheritance. And to take up the point that Megan mentioned, I would say using the Irish language as an act of resistance from the sameness that Megan spoke about, an act of it's okay to draw from ancient wisdom rather than official orthodoxy. And I would say that many of the problems that we have in our world today stem from a lack of biodiversity, a lack of linguistic diversity, and also globalization. But there's one silver lining in all that, and globalization, I suppose, is allowing us to link up and to share our ideas about the importance of language. And when all the people get together and get behind linguistic diversity, the way we're slowly moving out of denial about biodiversity, I think our voice will become louder and will have to be listened to. So that's the resistance I would say with regard to the Irish language. But also there's only joy, only richness that will come from learning in native languages, the Irish language in the context here in the north of Ireland. You seldom hear people saying, well, I went to Irish classes for a whole year and I became depressed and it made my life a misery, but I had to keep going because I had paid. No, it's all I feel as though I've started a journey. I feel connection. I feel more in tune. I feel I know myself better. So that's the way we're looking to the Irish language. It just gives and keeps giving far more than you'll ever do on behalf of your native or your mother tongue, so to speak.
Thank you. In Canada, use of Indigenous languages was controlled through racist federal initiatives like residential schools that work to separate children from their families and culturally assimilate the children into fitting the Canadian hegemonic culture. These residential schools were rife with abusive and dehumanizing practices to try to separate the children from their culture, their ancestors, and their identities. Despite the Canadian government's efforts to erase many of these languages and erase cultures, bloodlines, and histories, the Canadian government failed. The disastrous effects of cultural assimilation projects have the power to be reversed through language revitalization projects throughout Canada. What are some of the ideal ways for these programs to be conducted, and what needs to change for these programs to have lasting effects? How has cultural and language revitalization projects worked in Armagh, Northern Ireland, as well as the Republic of Ireland? Okay, so now I'm going to open it up to all of you all, and we'll start with Jerry.
Just before the last question, in terms of the use of Ojibwe one here in Saskatchewan, we started using we reclaimed our place name in the late 80s, when I became Indian. It was recognized, under this old Hudson Bay company host name, Fort Alexander. But when we, when we came to office in the late 80s, we decided that we would reclaim our place, and that's in keeping with what I said earlier in terms of the Kiminal Manisha. This is our land, and this is our territory, and this is where our families are buried, and this is our future. So Saskatchewan, we started using the name Saging. Is kind of like a variation of the word, taking back our place name. The other thing, Tebue, the truth, is our Ujibige, in Nakinege, our written law. And Tebue is written entirely in Ojibwe. And all of our one of the things we did with respect to like our negotiations, our dealings with government agencies or part of their institutions, we have Saging Inakinege when he got this law, and it's a law that controls all our relationships with federal, provincial levels of government, and also their agencies. Manitoba Hydro, under this, to ask for permission to operate along the Winnipeg River, which stretches from the Ontario border, where it empties into Lake Winnipeg, hence the names, where the river widens. So Manitoba Hydro operated seven major dams. Under Saging Inakinege, when we took back that authority and that rightful, I'm not going to use the word ownership, but that rightful this stewardship or this caring of this river, we took that back. So the one Manitoba Hydro had to come to our community to ask for permission to operate those dams. So from there, we had we created we didn't recreate, but we went back in how we did things. So we ended up with an elders council, men's council, women's council, elders council and a lawmaking assembly, which essentially determined how we would deal with all these other entities that I mentioned. These levels, well, these two types of governments, federal, provincial, and their institutions. So that was a pretty powerful thing, and a lot of that was tied to the language. And we also made it necessary. We also that one day of the week, the band office, our administration office, everyone would speak in Ojibwe one. That was our language of the day. And that kind of tells you, you talk about hegemony, well, that tells you how much influence the English language has in our community, or had in our community at that time. So just taking back one day out of a 5-day week to speak with Ojibwe. And all of our general assemblies would be, well, I mean, we make an attempt to do an Ojibwe one. And because if I tried to speak English at my time, you know, to speak, you know, as leader of the community, elders would say, "Taga, me Ojibwe mwen or Anishinaabe mwen, Kina Anishinaabe." You're speaking the language. You're either Anishinaabe or you're Ojibwe. And I like to share. I'll end I know I'm not answering your question because I'm not like Darren is involved in language revitalization. I'm at the periphery. You know, I'm watching what these young people are doing, and but I'll share this one story. So he had been away from the community for a while, and just before the start of the community, or the community assembly, I asked him, Stan, I said, Stan, can you open the assembly with a prayer? He was surprised. You know, this is my first time coming to the assembly, and you were there. He says, so he started, and he's a fluent speaker, and then he said, Namana, and then he stopped. And then people were, you know, they were wondering what he's going to say. Namana, he just stopped there. And then this elder said, Umanan. And then that kind of broke the ice. And it's the humor. What I'm trying to say, Stan was a fluent speaker, but when he was asked to speak Ojibwe in like doing an invocation, he had difficulties. So when he stopped at Namana, that's I'm going to, and this old lady just finished what he said, Omanan. I know this is a public thing, but it broke up the assembly, and it was just you know, just a funny thing. So what she told me after is never have that man open the assemblies, you know, because yeah. Anyways, that was my story about you know, challenging, using language to challenge hegemony, and using language to take back control and authority. And anyways, I'm sorry I didn't answer your question about the what can we do. So, but Darren will be right.
Thank you for that, Jerry. You didn't answer the question, but you had some good points, so we'll keep you.
Yeah.
Patrick.
Well, the whole question of the politics again goes back to place names. So I'm here in Minnesota, and a young playwright from Derry called Brian Friel, who just became a professional writer in 1960. He came here at the opening of the Guthrie Theater in 1963 in Minneapolis, and he learned the ropes of how to become a competent playwright in Minneapolis. And then he went back to Ireland and he finished a play called Philadelphia, Here I Come, which was produced in 1964. And then his real contribution to this debate was a play he wrote in 1980 produced 41 years ago in Guildhall in Derry called Translations. And that was about a situation in Ireland in the 1830s when the English were mapping Ireland, the Ordnance Survey. And that's the same kind of thing that Jerry was talking about, that as the English Ordnance Survey mapped Ireland, they extracted and anglicized and confused the connection of the people with their language, with their memory, with their landscape. And that production in 1980 dramatizes an Irish language-speaking community and the English officers, but it had to be played in English. So it was a convention of the play that listening, you understood that when one set of speakers spoke, they were speaking in Irish, but because the English language was so powerful at the time in 1980 that it had to all be played in English. So the play dramatized the loss of the linguistic heritage, the loss of the place names, and the problem of how can we communicate and refine our connection to the heritage. So it overlaps with what Jerry has been saying. And what is interesting is that from 1980 on, as Raymond will testify, there have been a greater amplification and energizing of Irish language television, schools, Gaelscoileanna. And so that sense of trying to reconnect to the language and the meaning of the names. In Ireland, there's a heavy hand of Anglicization, which is similar in some respects to the native experience. And it's not, while we have lots of organizations now, it's not as easy to find the sense of the spontaneous love of the language that buries up from the spirit. That to me is you can show it in drama and poetry and song and verse, but to let the person see the meaning of the language is part of their inner psyche, you know. That's kind of the ultimate political act. Megan, you were saying this earlier too, the assertion of the individual identity against the mass society, the homogenization, standardization. Everybody's the same. Everybody's got the same marketed capitalistic emptiness pushed at them. And they're able to kind of go into themselves and find that spark of connection to their linguistic heritage. So they are mapping their psyche and then seeing their psyche mapped back in their landscape and their connection. And Jerry, thanks for that story. That was a great story, man. I was waiting for a great story from you, and that was a great story.
Thank you. Thanks.
Hopefully Stanford forgives him.
Next we'll go to Megan.
Miigwech. So your question, it first made me think about the fact that a lot of different colonial ways that have been imposed or that it took place, what the purpose was, and that it was to take away that connection between the spirit and the spirit of the land. And so they're all so related. And so in my mind, it's not only working on language revitalization, there's all these ripples that connect all of them. So especially connecting with spirit in the ways that we can. And so that means things like doing tobacco offerings, saying hello to the trees and the plants and everyone around, but also speaking that language, introducing yourself, learning who you are, and just taking it as it goes and doing it in the ways that you can. And so I know for myself, I learned to introduce myself in the language, and it wasn't so hard to learn. It was hard to get that place in my throat. I was not used to that. But what was really hard was actually doing it. And it wasn't hard in the sense, like human Megan doesn't really even know what was going on, but my spiritual side and my blood memory. And I remember I could barely talk because I was crying so hard. And it woke something up. And And those were really the only words that I knew in the language. And then yet I could still dream in the language. Meanwhile, I don't know it. And so it was something that reminded me, like, yeah, this is your place and you belong here, which is especially big for someone like me, because in my family, those ways were lost a long time ago. And so, you know, you get imposter syndrome and you think, like, is this my place? And when you're not asking it, someone else is, at least for a while, it seemed. So, and I see so many good things in place, and I don't like the word normal. It's important to normalize speaking the language and being in interaction with the language. And something that comes to mind is at the University of Winnipeg, and I'm not sure who else is involved in this, but they're actually doing a soap opera in the language right now. You know, and the goal is to listen and to see what words you catch on to. And then also the fellow who teaches me right now on our Saturday class, he speaks on NCIS, I believe that's the radio station, about the weather for an hour, you know, every weekday, I believe it is. And so just those little things. And then even when I see the water or talk about the water, or if I see the moon or the sun, or absolutely anything, if I know that word, I say it. And I just take advantage of those moments in the sense that I'm doing what I can, not only for me, but I hope I'm around for a long time and I help people as well. So it's such a big ripple effect, just like everything in our ways of knowing. And it's never just one piece of pie, and it's, well, all the ingredients in the pie, you know? So it's such a beautiful thing, but it comes back, I think, to relating and learning that spirit and learning what's real and what's not, because we're told so many things aren't real. And, well, in my world, they're real. So yeah, just doing what we can as we can. And helping in all those ways, and also not feeling guilty when we can't do things. You know, it's okay if you don't have the space or the gift or the capability. We have to be grounded, or try to be grounded, or work towards being grounded, because it'll help us all in the end. Miigwech.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you. Darren?
For us, I teach at the University of Winnipeg, and when I was asked to develop a new language course on either land-based or immersion. And so I went and asked elders. I went and asked my parents, my aunties and uncles, my language speaker network about what would be the best way to teach language. And they asked me, well, what do you guys do there? And I said, well, we teach intro, we teach intermediate. They're in the classroom once a week for 3 hours. And they looked at me puzzled, like, why do you do it that way? And I was like, well, that's the way the university has structured it for so long. And they're like, well, you can't just have them learn for 3 hours in one setting. Have you graduated a fluent speaker? They started asking me, and I was like, I had to go and find out. And what I found out was, like, no, we hadn't graduated a fluent speaker, because there's big gaps between, for us, it's a year-long program, and it's you're taking Ojibwe from September to April, and then from April back to September, you're not taking any Ojibwe, and then you come in and you take intermediate the next year. And so they're spending a lot of time re-familiarizing students with language. So what I ended up doing, once I asked the elders, like, and language speakers, like, what do we do? They said, take the students out on the land. That's the best way. You're going to have to give them an immersive environment. You're going to have multiple speakers with you. You can't just be one person teaching the language. They have to hear it. constantly, and they have to be put in a position where they have to speak it. So what I did is I piloted my course 3 times. It's called the Ojibwe Field School. And the first iteration, we had no textbook. We had nothing. And so we had to do everything from scratch. I got a whole bunch of elders together to come and help me. And we figured out things to do. This one happened in the first one, we took them out in the winter. So it was 3 weeks in the classroom with me and then 1 week in the bush with the elders. We took them snaring, we took them tracking, we took them medicine picking in the winter, and we taught them songs and traditional stories in the language. And the one rule was when we're all together in a classroom setting, so to speak, Anishinaabe only Anishinaabe can be spoken. And if you don't understand, say, like, I don't understand. Can you explain? And so we would stop, explain what was being said, and then say, okay, do you understand what we're doing now? And so that first iteration went a little well. The second iteration, we did it in the spring again, and we did some similar stuff, but this time we went along with the seasonal stuff that we could do in the spring. So we were tapping trees, we were going out and doing interesting little adventures out in the bush, harvesting trees to set up ceremonial sites, etc. And there we started to develop a sort of like a curriculum on what they needed to do, and camp life, in other words, like words you needed to say, like you need to go cut wood, you need to go gather water, you need to go do all these things. And it ended up being like a survival camp for the students. If they didn't understand, they kind of, if they weren't able to say, day, like I'm hungry, we didn't eat until someone actually said it. So for us, me as the instructor, I was like, someone please say it. I'm getting hungry here. So until someone actually physically said, like, I'm hungry, then we'd stop work and we'd go start cooking. So it ended up being a little bit more immersive and getting students to actually speak up. And so our field school, we haven't been able to run it for a couple of summers now because of what's going on in the world. But I find that the students who have taken these field schools are actually doing a lot better than just sitting in the class, because they're continuing their language learning in that little space of 1 month of not giving up everything that they learned for an entire 8 months prior. And one is actually doing a language program in her home community now. She's I wouldn't say she's fluent. I would say she's beyond novice, not quite functional, but she's in between there. And so whatever she's doing, whatever she's learned, she's teaching others. So for me, that's my thing too. It's an imperative for every speaker and every learner to teach others, and to do it in ways that maybe the education system, the Western education system, doesn't quite understand. And I apologize, I went on a long rant again. I'm so sorry. I apologize again. I promise to keep it short.
Darren, I would say I'm hungry all the time if I was on your.
We'd be cooking and eating all day. I have to say what you're doing.
That's all it takes, just to ask.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much, Darren. Though that was really, really, really interesting. So I guess we'll finish up this question with you, Raymond.
Thank you, Lily. And I'm going to try to be shorter than it was great to hear everybody. It was really, really really glued to every word that everybody said, you know, from Jerry's choosing one day a week or stealing back one day a week for the Ojibwe language, and Darren's bushcraft. It was just wonderful to hear everybody speaking. And in Ireland, on the island of Ireland, the education system for those who study Irish, it's compulsory in the Republic of Ireland and optional in the north here. Would do a reasonably good job in getting a degree of fluency, and but there are, if you add the numbers who say they have Irish in the north to those who say they have Irish in the south, you would get just shy of 2 million people. And probably the greatest issue that most of those Irish speakers have is not having the opportunity to speak all that language that they know or that they learned at school. There is, I think, a lot of the cynicism that related to the Irish language in the past has dissipated, where the Irish language may, in the minds of some people, have been associated with poverty or with backwardness. And I think that's a result of the trauma that was mentioned earlier on from colonial conquest and dispossession, both land and linguistically. So there are many schemes to get people to use their language. Some of them are traditional, like the Gaelin debates, which brings the Irish language out of the classroom, and it's a high standard of fluency required to be involved in the debates. Traditional music competitions run through the medium of Irish. And when you mentioned the bushcraft, Darren, I'm reminded that 40 years ago, Gaelin, the organisation I work for, had a similar scheme called Actra, where boys and girls went to the Gaeltacht and carried out mountain climbing, kayaking, gullying, and beach activities, snorkeling through the medium of Irish. So 28,000 teenagers attend the Gaeltacht every year. So that's a wonderful way of actually using the Irish language. And we often say that it is in the Gaeltacht that you fall in love with the Irish language. You learn it at school, but you fall in love with it when you go and actually use it in Tubber na Gaeilge, the Gaeltacht. So I think that the best idea, I was involved in a conversation about when immersion education should start, which is a big debate, particularly here in the north. And a person said that children should start to learn Irish when they're pink and slimy. And I would agree with that. So as early as possible, and it's lifelong learning also. So many adults are coming back and falling in love again with the Irish language. And I'm just going to mention one other way that really has caught on, and that would be very like Jerry's reclaiming one day of the week for the Ojibwe language. We have pop-up Gaeltachts here all over the island of Ireland, where people are made aware of a get-together, and it's called a pop-up Gaeltacht outside the Gaeltacht, where people come together to socialise and speak their language in a relaxed way. So there will be no grammar police going round correcting attendees. It's all for fun. And that's something that we had a problem with in the past. People saying, oh, you can't say that, you need to say it this way, you know, grammar police. We don't really have that anymore. People realize that, you know, it's, you know, nobody does that in the great global languages. So why should you do it in the native language or in the target language? We need to encourage the use of the language that people have learned in class in a meaningful way, not unlike going to plays, which Patrick mentioned, none least than translations, which really gets to the nub of the matter about and that's one similarity that we have, the joy and the beauty of the place names in the native languages of Canada and America, very similar to the beauty of the place names in Ireland.
Thank you, Raymond. Very, very interesting last line. Oh, sorry, but were you going to say something, Darren?
I wanted to comment on, I forgot to say, part of the elders' direction was allow the families to come, allow the students' families to come. And so we had children amongst us, and we really didn't focus on them, but I focused on the students. But they were always around and they listened. And then one day, like towards the end of that 1 week we were together, one of the kids saw something on the floor and it says, "Wagon anyway." And we all stopped and we started clapping. And the child said, "What is that?" in the language. So we weren't just by them sitting and listening to their parents, the kids picked it up and listening to us. Like we weren't really focused on the kids. They were just allowed to be there, and we had childcare that reminded them. But on day 4, that child actually said, "Waking anyway." What is that? Saw a toy on the floor. What is it? So it popped in after I talked, and I apologize. So maybe I should get sorry.
That's really, really, really beautiful story, actually. That's super, super sweet. And I guess it does just show the power of when you just start speaking it, kids just pick it up so easily. You know, it's so quickly to just pass that on to other children. Like I remember this may be going off, but I remember living in Dublin, and the TV would always have the Irish news on, right? The RTE news would have the Irish news on before the English news. And so you're just constantly seeing Gaelic everywhere. And so you kind of just start to pick it up a little bit here and there. You know what I mean? Just little bits where it's so much integrated into your everyday life. It becomes so part of everything, you know? Yeah, so thank you for that story. So this one, I guess, this question, I think, has been sort of in the undercurrents or in the corner of pretty much everyone's response and pretty much everything that everyone has said. So we might as well end it off with this. So I'm going to try to butcher this phrase in Gaelic. Tirgan Tanaga Tirgan Anam. So that is Gaelic for a country without its language is a country without its soul, which my dad says a lot. And so when you think about that, how can language connect us to something greater and keep alive the spirit of something beyond us that transcends physical reality? So we're going to start with Jerry.
Well, I think we here, we all see that, right? I think Canada is looking to find its way, I think. And it's like I should step back. This healing, always talk about healing and reconciliation, and but it's always our people that have to heal, right? And heal from the trauma of colonization, heal from the trauma of oppression, of attempted genocide. It's our responsibility to heal. I'm constantly hearing that. And I'm constantly hearing as well that it's our responsibility to reconcile for all of these wrongs. But actually, to that point, I think Canada is, and if you look at this constantly, and it arouses me actually, good Canadian values. Well, what are these values? We're having, we're having a missing and murdered woman, didn't care. And we're having an education system. You mentioned the survival schools that the American Indian movement started, in the 60s in Minneapolis. And some of the offshoots in Toronto with the Wandering Spirit School. And then I like to actually think of Shingwakanamagigmik as it's about survival. This teaching lodge, the teaching of Ojibwe and Anishinaabe, and the fact that Shinwak offers, provides a degree in Anishinaabe studies, which is, it's not this. I guess to Megan's earlier point about sameness, it's so different, right? It's specific to it's specific to our people, because Shinwak Kanamagmik is situated in Ojibwe Anishinaabe territory, Ojibwe Anishinaabe land. It's situated in the home of Shingwakuns. So I like to think, I like to look at it in that regard. But again, coming back to my point, about a country without a soul, and you look at what's happening. And I wasn't here Wednesday because I had to deal with my cousin whose son was actually murdered while in custody. So where our family, like I said, we're a political family, but we're wondering how we're going to deal with that, and we're not without our network and reach, right? How do we deal with it? So all of that is revitalization. Everything that we're attempting to do with our identity, our past is actually our future. And where are we coming? Where are we going? And so part of that for me, I think it, Patrick, that saying, and literally it speaks volumes for me, right? And Canada, I don't think is, I would say, probably, I think I'm not going to pass, I actually should pass judgment on Canada or the United States, because we're encountering, similar struggles, in trying to find our soul. And for us, I've heard language, which is win-win, Manatuke, ceremony, our history, our way, it's in all of that, and that's what we're trying to find too, and we're struggling with that, right? And I just want to say, and I'll pass. I had an opportunity of sitting in Darren's Ojibwe class. It was probably for me, it was one of the more exciting classes I have had the opportunity of sitting in. People were engaged, and it was a lot of fun. And actually, you know, to say Ojibwe, you know, what is Ojibwe speaking? You know, what is that? And to actually break down and go to the root of the word, the origin of the word. It's like Ojibwe. People say, well, what does that mean? And people say, well, it's a word of Chippewa or Chippewa to pucker up. And then I had an opportunity of, I spent a lot of time with Eddie Fenton Benet. And I was also introduced to a fellow by the name of Pine Showman. And I asked him this, what does that really mean? And he said, well, just remember our, you know, our migration story, you know, moving from the east to the west. And one of the responsibilities of these people, our people, was to record the history, was to write about our history. So Ojibwe, in his mind, was Ojibwe, these people that write, these people that record. And he said, well, and that makes fluent sense, but that makes perfect sense for me, right? Because the Ojibwe, so we have the scrolls. We also have the petroglyphs and the rock paintings. And one of the most prolific authors, I think I said that last time, was Shingwakus. You know, from Kitigan ZB. The Agama Canyon is lovely. And anyways, all of that to say is to really, for me, and to be able to understand, when you have to really go to, you have to dig down and go to the root and to learn the history. And I had that opportunity to see that work really effectively in a classroom setting. I know there's a lot of talk about moving back to the land, and I've been part of the you know, immersion classes or you know, in Lac Seul, in the far north, Pangnirtung, and boy, they're effective, right? You know, because it's hands-on, and you're dealing with it every second that you're awake, and probably, actually, I should step back and say every second that you're alive, because you would dream, and you're able to dream that, and you know, I was pretty fortunate to have that. Sorry, I took too long. Big Witch, me in. I said, well, that's it for me.
Thank you, thank you.
You should have a button that mutes you or mutes me. Sorry.
5 more minutes sign or something. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jerry. I want to just express my condolences and wish your family strength and healing during mourning that death. That makes me feel that this Canadian state I'm living in probably lacks a bit of soul. And I wish that this state could find that. So I really do want to express condolences there. And thank you for the thoughts that you shared. I think we've gone beyond where there's too long talking. Just let it all out, you know? So thank you so much. So Patrick, if you want to speak next.
I also want to extend condolences, Jerry, to you and your family for that that horrible event. I'll just make it brief. I mean, the basic point, I think, has been said beautifully by the great experts here in both the Irish language and the Ojibwe language. It's creating your own atlas, your own map of your soul by speaking this heritage, speaking it to your family, speaking to your kids, and creating a map in which you're not lost. You are found. You are connected to the naming and the memory and the stories and you are, Megan said this earlier, you're not lost in an anonymous mass. And because you're not lost, other people can also become found. And it's simply a matter of, just speaking a few words here and there, phrase here and there. We at the Celtic Junction we already teach the Irish language, but we're going into even more foundational, simple, high frequency words, in the most foundational kinds of ways to approach it. And we're trying to deepen our own journey and deepen our own journey into the language here in Minnesota to give it to anybody who's interested, including you, Lily.
One day.
Sorry.
One day I'll be there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Megan?
So when you were asking your question, just two things came to me about the people needing to believe, but also just be curious, because sometimes it's hard to commit to believing, especially when we haven't experienced something. And so I think it's that trusting of self and knowing who to trust around us. I think that's really important in these situations. And because it can take us further and further and further. And so I can relate back to some of the things I've experienced and thinking, well, that doesn't make sense because I haven't heard anybody talk about that. And so I think sharing the experiences as well, I think that's very, very important, because otherwise someone thinks that they're the only person who's experiencing something, and that it doesn't make sense. So the more that we share, it allows people to have a deeper understanding and a deeper way of knowing. And when we look at most of the problems that we have in any colonized country, really, it's that lack of understanding. That's what allows it to keep happening. And it's because the doer and the group that has more power or has larger ability to take away or control, they only see things on a surface level, if that, and they try to come up with their own answers. They try to come up with what true value is, and generally basing it off of things like social constructs, things that really stroke the ego. And so if we can get away from that and just be our most truest and most authentic form, I think that will change a lot of things, instead of thinking, what do I need to have to be more equal to others, and knowing we already have everything within us and we just have to push some of those other things out. And while it's not easy and it's a lifelong journey, it's worth being uncomfortable for, because each time you have that cycle of transformation, and I know I've been through a few myself, and they're so rough, and I hate them, but I also love them, because it's so much brighter when I'm out and I don't even recognize the person that I was before. So that believing and that curiosity, it just opens a door. And if it's not a door, I don't know, it opens like a crack in the window, and that's all we need. And just a little bit of something needs to come in, and it can change the lives of so many. Yeah, I think that's all I have. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you. Lots of good thoughts there. Thank you. So next we'll go to Darren.
Hi. So yeah, to answer your question, how can language connect us to something greater and keep alive the spirit of something beyond us that transcends physical reality? Jerry kind of touched on it when he talked about what I do in my class, breaking down the words and going to the root. And for me, again, going back to my introduction, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, and Dao. Like I said, I'm from the Anishinaabe Ojibwe Nation. But when you understand the language and you start understanding where those root words come from, like Anishinaabe or Anishinaabe, Ani nisinabe oweaking. A human was lowered onto the earth. That's what that means. Anishinaabe. And Ojibwe, Jerry talked about how we're Ojibwe Igewen, like we wrote. But there was another interpretation from Mark Thompson from our home community of Saiging. He says, we survived a great flooding of the earth by going to the mountains. And he said, this is what we called each other, Wajiwi Biwak. And we contracted it now to say Ojibwe. So these two autonyms that we use for ourselves, Anishinaabe and Ojibwe, when I say Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, and Dao, I'm telling you not just I'm just from the Anishinaabe Ojibwe nation, but I'm from the people who were lowered onto the earth and survived a great flood by going to the mountains. So just those three words, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe. Now I'm giving you a gift of our spiritual nature, of how we came from the stars. It's reminding us of our creation story, and when we were on the earth, what we did and how we survived by going to the mountains and isolating ourselves and coming back and then flourishing again. So that understanding of who we are and understanding of language gives us that ability to think beyond our physical form. And the teachings that we're given, like I've said before, Manitou Kiminigu was young and it was a gift from Creator. So it transcends this reality and this physical reality that we all know that Creator gave us something. And that's one of the greatest myths that is out there, that we didn't have a belief in Creator, right? And so when we talk and we talk about Manitou, we're letting the world know, yes, we do believe. And we have our own way of communicating with that spiritual being that started the universe. So I'll keep it short there. I'll say miigwech again.
Thank you so much, Darren. And then I guess we will end the question again with Raymond.
Thank you, Lily. You put a lot of effort into composing your questions. They're a piece of philosophy in themselves, and yes, the Irish language can certainly help its speakers to transcend this scientific, neoliberal, overly logical, economic view of the world, because of the fact that by speaking the Irish language, you can plug into our ancient wisdom. And there's volumes and volumes, if not oceans, of meaningful wisdom captured in the Irish language. And as the Irish language develops, it's creating new approaches to the world ahead of us. You know, you never just get a language, you get a culture, you get another window on the world around you. And you know, it was just wonderful hearing Jerry and Darren talking about the origins of words. So I'm going to just tell you a few things about one very simple word, brack. Brack is the Irish language word for trout, and it's also the Irish language word for speckled, because of the color, the beautiful multicolored scales on a trout. It's also used to describe an area where it's not a completely native speaking area, but it's partially native speaking. So therefore it's not a Gaeltacht, but it's a brack Gaeltacht. Again, this speckled notion. Native speakers are speckled throughout it. a cat brack is a turncoat, somebody that would go against their native beliefs to take on the belief of the stranger, so to speak, because those who were proselytizing used a book, and the name of that book was On Cat Brack, the speckled cat. And my favorite aspect of that word brack is the Irish language word for a doppelganger. So if you take a trout, it is exactly the same on this side as it is on that side. You know, if you just, I don't want anybody to cut a trout in half, but you know what I mean? Even though it's such a complex pattern, it's exactly the same on one side as it is on the other. And to talk of somebody else as your doppelganger, your double, you say, he is my lavrak, he is my half trout. So that's a very simple word, and it shows you the way that the Irish people observed the world around them. They seem to have more time to examine and explore the world around them, and it's very poetical, and you know, it's just wonderful. And when I went to college and learned the Irish language, I learned a lot of Irish language, and I had great teachers. But when I went to the Gaeltacht as a young teenager for the first time, and was able to sit in a pub and drink and relax and tell some risque jokes in the Irish language, I don't think I ever felt as alive as I did. So that's a way that the Irish language can just, and other native indigenous languages can just invigorate and revitalize and replenish. And one summer I went to work in Wildwood, New Jersey. And the one thing I missed when I was there, and I had a lot of fun when I was there, but when it got dark and late at night, I really genuinely missed what I would normally do during the summer, and that is go and plug into the Gaeltacht experience where I am totally immersed in my native language. So that, you know, this, I'm the last person that Lily's going to ask. It has been a wonderful exchange, and you know, you could take out the word Ojibwe and insert the word Irish or Gaelic, and likewise, when I'm speaking, I could just insert the word Ojibwe, or you could insert the word Irish. The similarities, even though we have many differences, there are parallels, there are similarities, and this discussion has really brought that home to me in a very, very powerful, meaningful way. So, Guracéad Maigah a Charge. Back to you, Lily.
Well, I think, yeah, that's a good way to end it. I also want to extend my deepest thanks and gratitude for you guys all bearing with me and answering all these questions I had, and really kind of enriching my understanding of myself and the place that I live. You know, I live in Winnipeg, I live in Canada, and I'm learning so much about the place that I'm living now, and also the place that I'm from. So I have to say thank you to everybody for expanding my knowledge and expanding the knowledge of anyone who will be watching this. I took lots of notes. I took notes on everything you guys were saying, so I definitely I enjoyed it a lot. And all I can say is one day I hope that we can do it again.